brackets come out tonight? Who are the ones going to be? Who are those bubble teams that are going to have their dreams burst? And how do you fill these things out as soon as they come out tonight? Who better to talk to? And we'll get Jon Crispin on the phone in just a second than somebody who's been there, who's been in the tournament, who's been a part of one of those teams that was a surprise Sweet 16 run. I still remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was 25 years ago. I was a junior at Penn State, and I was in a house with my 3 roommates, all of us probably skipping some sort of class to watch Penn State in the NCAA tournament. Penn State in the last 70 years has been to one Sweet 16. They won't be going this year. But the next best thing, the man who was a part of that Sweet 16 team alongside his brother Joe, Jon Crispin, joins us. He'll be calling some of the games in Philly on the first weekend of the NCAA tournament right here on Westwood One alongside Scott Graham. Morning, John. Thanks for making the time, my man. How are you?
Oh, my gosh. I love living in the past. You know, when we actually accomplish something, because now all I do is talk about things, and rarely am I actually right in the end. We just share opinions, and so to be able to live in the past a little bit, I'm absolutely digging it. That was a really special time, and it's kind of, there's some pride in what we achieved, but there's also some sadness in the sense that we're still relevant, you know, because they haven't been back since. So I think there's a part of Joe and I in particular, like, I think we're ready for that time for Penn State to be good again, because it was a fun run. And I know it's great hearing your story that you got to enjoy it too, because that was special time.
No, those springs when you and your brother were on the same team leading Penn State. You know, as a kid who grew up in Pittsburgh and got to see Pitt basketball compete all the time in those years, it was great to be up there in school at Penn State as you guys were a part of the Nittany Lions, like you said, making one of the few runs, and we hope it gets back to that eventually for Penn State. But let's pivot, John, to the teams that are in it. And let's start with the teams that we know are in it, the teams that will probably be the 1 seeds going into this tournament. I mentioned it a couple minutes ago. I know it was a bad loss for Florida. I guess not a bad loss, a tough loss for Florida yesterday to Vanderbilt. I still don't see them falling off the 1 line. I think it's still Duke, Michigan, regardless of what happens against Purdue today, Arizona and Florida as the 1 seeds, because UConn has left something to be desired, certainly as a 2. And I just don't see it. Those 4 are the clear-cut 1s for me right now.
I would agree. And as much as I agree, and I'd also say it almost doesn't matter. You know, the NCAA tournament comes down to simple things. We say matchups, but the reality is who's the better team on that given night. You have to be able to be the team that can be the best on that given night. And I think what Florida ran into was a bad matchup and a really good team. It's a team in Vanderbilt that kind of fell off a little bit with some tough losses, but they're fast, they're aggressive, and particularly in the NCAA tournament, the aggressor usually wins. Now, Florida has adjusted throughout the course of the season, and I think people saw them fall off a little bit as if they weren't that good. They had to adjust from having a guard-dominated lineup with good bigs to being a big-dominated team with decent guards. And the fact that they've gotten themselves back to the conversation of being on the 1 line, I think Todd Golden's just done a really good job there. But there are probably 10 to 14 teams that wouldn't shock me if they're in the Final 4. Obviously, there are Cinderellas from year to year that get in there. No one would have predicted that. And just because you slid them in on your bracket doesn't mean you actually thought that was going to happen. You were just being cute, trying to get a couple extra points in your bracket. Like, no one really knows these things. And I think it's one of those things where it's fun for us with the NCAA tournament. It's also torture because we're supposed to know something, and in the end, we're just proving that we don't.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned picking the upsets just so that you have a certain allotment of upsets in the first couple of rounds when you're filling out your brackets. But last year, that worked against you, right? If you went chalk last year, you ended up with 4 1 seeds in the Final 4. That's not been the norm, really, over the last 5 years. We've had at least an 8 seed or worse in the Final 4 for the last 5 years. Last year aside, obviously. So when you look at the balance, John, of this year's tournament, does it look to you like another year like last year's tournament where the 1s and the 2s are going to go deep? Or do you look, as you look down the projected brackets that are all over the place this time of year, do you look down and say, no, there's a 7 or an 8 there or a 9 maybe that could jump up and really shock some people?
I think while there's great parity in the game, and the parity's there because there's a ton of talent, the last couple years of, I call it professional college basketball because that's what it is. The last couple years of professional college basketball has pulled some of the top programs and put them in their own category, like the Michigans of the world that could buy whatever talent they want to get. Arizona, they can get the talent they want. Also, some of these programs who are really willing to invest, like BYU came out and just said, all right, you want to play pro basketball? I'll get $7 million to A.J. Dubasta. Like, why not? There's some programs that just kind of welcome this pro basketball approach. Where they made the mistake was they didn't buy depth. The teams that have depth with that great talent have the best chance of winning. And I think that's been the case all year because the teams that lack depth lose one player and they're not the same team. And we've seen that a lot this year. So I think there are some really high-level teams that have invested in depth, and that's been huge. Arizona obviously being one of them, Florida being one of them. They have bigs that can just kind of come in droves. So I think the teams that have depth have a little bit more of an advantage because on any given night, you don't know who it's going to be. And sometimes if you have 5 really good players and your top 3 guys aren't hitting shots, anybody can beat you, particularly this time of year. So I think depth's going to be a key. And once the bracket comes out, that's one of the things I would look at in terms of picking my brackets, especially late when you think of Elite 8, Final 4. Who really has the depth to withstand even an injury or two, because that happens.
Jon Crispin of ESPN, Sirius XM, and Westwood One on the phone with us here on BetMGM Gameday. He'll be on the call in Philly next weekend alongside Scott Graham of some of the first and second round games you'll hear on Westwood One, inside the Westwood One app as well. Download it if you haven't yet. Let's talk about some of those teams that maybe gave us a little bit of a surprise. I mentioned Florida earlier. That surprise was Vanderbilt doing what they did yesterday. That strikes me as a team, Vandy, and look, they've still got Arkansas this afternoon. They tip in about 90 minutes in the SEC championship game. But Vandy strikes me as one of those, say, 3 or 4 line teams that you look up and maybe a 1 or a 2 has been knocked off in the Sweet 16, and they're a popular pick because everybody sees them in the SEC tournament. And now 2 weekends later, you're looking at them maybe being a win or 2 away from the Final Four. Who are some of those teams? You know, the ones are the ones that we're all talking about, the Dukes, Michigans, Arizonas, Floridas. Who are some of those second-tier teams, in your opinion, John, to keep an eye out for?
I think Arkansas is unquestionably one of them. When you have, from my perspective, the best player in college basketball, which is Darius Acuff, he is absolutely unbelievable. If he's playing at a high level, Arkansas can beat anybody in the country. Now, yes, they don't have the 6th, 7th, 8th guy that you can really rely on, but the way they're playing and allowing Darius Acuff to play the way he wants, I think that makes them dangerous because one of the things that John Calipari's done really well with Darius Acuff is he's done nothing, right? They don't really run a ton of stuff that you can prep for. You have to prep for personnel, and that is a great player in Darius Acuff. Another team is a team that kind of surprised me a little bit last night in terms, and I've had them a couple times this year, is Virginia. What Ryan Odom has done with this Virginia team, and I don't know where they're going to fall when the bracket comes out, but I don't care where they are. They're as good as any 1 seed out there. They block shots. They play fast. They shoot the 3. They're aggressive. They still defend in a way that slows you down, and I think that's really disruptive. So there are some teams that you watch and you say, wow, they're really good. But what do they do to disrupt what you want to do? And I think Virginia's the type of team where they slow you down defensively, but then play aggressive on the offensive end. It's very disruptive in a game. So I think that's another one of those teams. Kansas is one of those ultimate wild cards because it comes down to Darren Peterson. My issue with Kansas is that they haven't been able to find continuity throughout the course of the year because of his availability or lack thereof. I don't even know if it's availability or just want to play or don't want to play. We really don't know what the situation is. So I think Kansas is one of those wild card teams. And then the other one I would say right now is St. John's. With what they did at the Garden, it was a dominant performance. And what I saw from Rick Pitino was actual emotion. I mean, it mattered to him. And I feel like that's a team that he has taken shots at this year, and they kept coming back. And God bless those kids for taking the heat and continuing to fight, because what I saw was a wealthy UConn team, and I saw a hungry St. John's group last night. If they can maintain that hunger, that's another team that you don't want to see in your region.
Yeah, and UConn, the way they've stumbled their way down the stretch, John. I have serious concerns about them being one of those teams on a top 4 line that doesn't even make it to Sweet 16 weekend.
So I have another thought about UConn, and as much as I love Dan Hurley, I think the future of coaching in the college game is not going to be absolute bonkers nuts. I think it's going to be guys that know how to manage players and manage personnel in a more personal way, and then also keep a calm chill on the game, given the fact that the game is more fluid and skill-based than it's ever been. I think the days of yelling and screaming and making a scene on the sideline, it just stresses your team out. And it's hard to play freely when you're carrying so much. So I think guys like, and I'll case in point, Ryan Odom. Well, how do you let your guys play fast? Well, first and foremost, you have to be calm. You can't have them play tense. They have to be loose. And that's the game today. It's less about structure, and it's more about fluidity. And it's more about skill. It's a pro-style, skill-based game. That's why a lot of these freshmen are doing so well. That's the type of game they've been groomed for their entire lives. So when you have these coaches that are so intense on the sideline, yelling and screaming, I don't think it frees you up as a player. And I think that's going to start to matter more and more in the coming years, especially as we professionalize things. Guys think they're pros. They may not be pros, and coaches might not treat them like pros because they really don't know what it means. But when they're getting paid, there's a certain entitlement that comes from that. And they don't take to getting screamed at and yelled at in front of people very well. So I think that's going to matter. And I really wonder if it takes a toll on a team like UConn throughout the course of the year where it's like so much intensity. We just got to free up and be loose. So that'll be an interesting one to see because you see teams, too, like Fred Hoiberg and what he's doing at Nebraska. They are loose and dangerous and a bunch of dudes who you really aren't threatened by until they start running you all over the gym. So I think there are some teams out there that'll slide in, and if they're loose enough, they'll be really dangerous.
I didn't see Jerry Dunn screaming at you guys all the time back in the day. He kept it cool.
He was pretty cool, but I also played at a time where, you know, if you missed a shot, you could come out, right? Like that was a different. Now, luckily, like when we went to Kentucky and beat Kentucky, and Joe and I had, you know, epic games. Luckily, we just made the shots, right? But there are times where we took a lot of the shots that are popular shots today that you'd get taken out for. So he didn't have to yell and scream to have that kind of impact, but that was never really his MO or personality anyway.
Jon Crispin with us here on BetMGM Gameday. He'll be calling some of the games in Philly this coming weekend alongside Scott Graham right here on Westwood One as we get ready for the bracket reveal later tonight and the NCAA Tournament. What's your reaction to seeing a team like Miami of Ohio go nearly undefeated the way they did, undefeated in the regular season and then finally losing in the MAC tournament? I still feel that there should be, I know the schedule isn't what it was for some of these teams in the power conferences, John, but I look at a team go on a run like that, even if a lot of the games were close, and I say, that team deserves to be in the 64. I know for TV's sake, they probably end up in Dayton to get people to tune in on Tuesday or Wednesday night, but that team deserves to be a solid 9 or 10 seed rather than having to go off to Dayton as an 11.
It's funny. Ultimately, I agree with you, right? In the end, I agree with you. But somewhere in there, I also agree to some degree that their wins aren't that good. And that's just that's truth. But in the end, I come back to, did you win? And how hard is it to win? Like every coach talks about how hard it is to win on the road, and they'll say, oh, I don't care the opponent. I know they're struggling, but still to go in on the road, so you're going to say that, and in the same breath, you're not going to credit Miami of Ohio for the fact that all they did was win this year. I mean, people know in this game how difficult it is to bring it every single day and find a way to break through and win, especially when games are tight. It gets even harder when games are tight. And what I would like to give them credit for is you are going into a conference tournament where you survived a season and you maintain this whole narrative throughout the season where we won every single game. And you go into a conference tournament of familiar opponents who know you very well, who have scouted you better than anybody else. If you just eliminate the tournament, they're in the field. So I just think we have to give credit for the regular season that they put forth. I know that they didn't play a tough schedule. Part of me wants to say, so what? And I just hope that something like this doesn't lead to a conversation about how we need to expand the field, because in reality, the reason we're expanding the field is to get more Power 5 teams. It's the same reason why we came up with the net. the net wasn't established for mid-majors. The net was established to get more Power 5 conference teams in. Because since the net, we've seen 14, 11 teams, like throw everybody from the SEC in last year, 10, 11, 12 from the Big Ten. As much as I love seeing the best conferences and the best teams from the best conferences playing, part of the joy and the excitement of the NCAA tournament is giving a lot of these little guys who really deserve a shot, giving them the chance that they want. If they lose, so be it. The story has continued. So I am with you. I would love to see them in the field, probably not in Dayton, although I was there in Dayton when FDU went on a run. So maybe you'd go there, you find rhythm, you get hot, it's a new season, it's outside of your conference, so maybe it's not a bad thing. Either way, you know what they have to do? Whatever game they get, go win.
Win, exactly. Jon, great stuff, man. Love catching up with you. Can't wait to hear you on the call next weekend in Philly alongside Scott Graham of the first and second rounds of the tournament right here on Westwood One. Thanks again, man.